Welcome everybody, we're here with Jasmine, Andean and Melanie Larre, the winners of DTM's first hackathon conducted in collaboration with UCL. And in this short interview, they will present the findings on the link between flood events and internal displacement in Burundi, which is a topic they had the opportunity to further develop with DTM London between August and September. Thank you both for being here today. To begin this interview, can you please summarize what your research idea was?
So our initial research idea was essentially to look at the relationship between levels of rainfall and levels of displacement in Burundi. What we essentially were trying to establish was whether there was kind of a very direct correspondence between these two factors, or whether other elements were more relevant in terms of levels of displacement, like vulnerability and resilience. But we weren't actually able to follow this research question through just because there wasn't really any available data, publicly available data on levels of rainfall in Burundi. So what we did instead is we looked at DTM's data on displacement in Burundi and focused specifically on floods. And we looked at the mediatization of flood events in the country, both in national media and international media. We were kind of trying to establish whether the mediatization of flood events then corresponds with levels of displacement, or again, whether other factors are more relevant in that.
And following the research you propose, can you please explain the relationship between media coverage and disaster events, and when does data report vis-a-vis when media reports?
So media coverage in disaster plays a crucial event to disseminating the information, in a quick and timely, fashionable way. It also gives, real-time information on disaster to the public, which is really important. And also regarding the vis-a-vis data report media situation, it's important to note that the media coverage often precedes official data reports. So, news organizations have reporters in the disaster event right when it happens, so they're able to quickly verify the information and relay it, whereas data might take longer to compile and also to verify.
In this case, based on your research, do you think that media can be utilized as a proxy to fill in the blanks when data collection is not possible or available? And if so, when is this possible?
I think there are serious limitations in trying to do that. Personally for us, we thought that these limitations were serious enough for our research question that we decided to shift the focus entirely. For example, kind of the mediatization of events often only really occurs once there are significant human losses. So if we're trying to establish whether events are mediatized, whether displacement occurs due to the severity of events or whether other factors are more relevant, that's not really possible with media data, just because the media wouldn't even be reporting on something in the first place if there wasn't significant damage. There are also a lot of other considerations with media and other limitations with media. So for example, a lot of the media sources are kind of based in the global north, or North America and Europe, and wouldn't necessarily be reporting on events happening in Burundi or in any kind of sub-Saharan African country to a significant extent. And of course, Burundi has its own national media, but then that's quite a narrow frame to be looking at such a kind of big research question through. And of course, kind of the international news cycle also affects things, whether there's international news elsewhere that is deemed more interesting than flooding in Burundi also impacts whether something gets mediatized. So kind of understanding either the severity of event or factors like vulnerability or resilience through media is really quite challenging. Of course, there are times when media can be useful, and that's particularly kind of, as Melanie was saying, in the aftermath of a disaster, when there's not been time yet to collect more official data sets and data reports. So in those cases, to kind of try to understand the initial elements and the initial responses to a situation, media data can be highly relevant. Or we're not trying to understand kind of the international response to a situation.
In this line of thought, could you please explain to us what challenges you encountered when using DTM data versus media sources?
So one of our primary challenges was around just comparing the DTM data and media sources, because of course these are collected in very different ways. So for example, in the media, they might be reporting on an event kind of several months after it took place. There was both immediate reporting and then reporting several months later when discussing displaced people, for example. And this caused challenges for us because they didn't always say exactly what month these events took place. And they might say kind of earlier this year or last spring or something along those lines, which when comparing it to the kind of more systematically collected data that IOM or DTM was compiling, where we did see the months in which displacement events took place. That had some problems. However, the DTM data also wasn't perfect. There was kind of a gap in the primary data set that we were looking at where they didn't record any displacements for the months of June to August, which is partially because it's a dry season. So flooding isn't meant to really be occurring in these months. So flood-related displacement is much, much lower. But when we were looking at the media reporting, we did actually see that there were some displacement events taking place in these months, although of course levels of displacement were much lower. So the DTM data wasn't entirely complete for these months.
Thank you very much, Jasmine. So in line with these challenges, can you please explain to us what the process of comparing DTM data to media sources was?
Well, first we were taking a look at the emergency tracking tool, obviously the DTM data set, and just we decided because of the lack of data that we found flooding for us to gather media articles and then compare it. But then, as Jazz mentioned, I think we were taking a look at the ETT data set and discovered that there was no data in the months of June, July, and August. So, and obviously that we know that because it was the dry season, we decided to omit. Well, we did two different parts of our project, and in one of them, we decided to omit the data, and we found that with the data that included only the media data set, we replaced the ETT data set with 0, and in the other one, we excluded it entirely. And our findings indicated that when we exclude the data from June to July and August, these months have a higher correlation.
As a final question, can you please explain who is counted or not in humanitarian data and how this affects reporting and the availability of data as a whole?
Well, who is accounted for can depend on different factors, the location, if it's in a secluded area, if it's a rural area, the vulnerability, and also cultural norms around who you're looking at. And this can lead to underreporting in conflict zones, marginalized groups, and remote areas. And also, age, gender, ethnicity, and disability are all something to take a look at, or something that a lot of people don't take a look at when reporting data. And having inaccurate data without reporting all of these people can result in misallocated resources and having an inadequate response to the disaster.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. Sorry, I know this is not part of the interview, but just stemming from everything that you've discussed in this interview, what do you think is kind of a general conclusion, or what can we learn from this research? And yeah, I don't know which one would like to start.
I'll start if that's okay. I think for me, at least, the kind of primary takeaway from here is that data collection, not necessarily within DTM, but when looking at kind of hydrometeorological hazards, etc., should really be improved quite significantly. There should be data on precipitation, for example, and disaster events available more publicly and in a more kind of comprehensive way. I think that this is particularly relevant now with the onset of climate change and with interest in, like, academic interest in this area increasing. I think that was quite a serious limitation for us, and I think it was a bit of a shame. I feel like the research that we could have conducted had we had data available would have also been very interesting, and I wonder how many other projects are limited by the lack of data available.
Okay, perfect. Thank you both so much for this very insightful segment. It's been really, really interesting working with you and just listening to what this research has resulted in. So yeah, thank you for your availability.